Your name isn't on the list." The guard's voice was a flat, gray slab of sound, as unimpressed by her as he was by the city's grime on his polished shoes. He didn't even bother to look at her, his eyes fixed on some point over her shoulder, a bouncer's trick to render a person insignificant. Elena Vance felt a familiar, hot prickle of shame and anger. Of course, her name wasn't on the list. Her name was on overdue library notices and the final demand for her electricity bill. It was scrawled on the back of a greasy napkin by the phone at the diner where she worked double shifts. It belonged to a world of cracked linoleum and the smell of burnt coffee, not one of velvet ropes and champagne that cost more than her rent. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice tighter than she wanted. Her best friend, Chloe, had sworn the invitation was legitimate, a +1 from her boss's boss. A charity gala at the Obsidian Spire, the most exclusive, almost mythical venue in the city. A place people like her only saw in magazines. The guard finally lowered his gaze, a slow, dismissive slide from her hopeful eyes to her 5-year-old dress that she'd spent a week altering. His lip curled, a minuscule movement that felt like a physical blow. "The only mistake was you thinking you could walk in here." Humiliation was a lead weight in her stomach. She was about to turn, to flee back to the world where she belonged, when a sudden hush fell over the clamoring entrance. The velvet rope, previously an impenetrable barrier, was unclipped with a soft, respectful snap. The guard who had just dismissed her stiffened, his spine turning to iron. A man emerged from the shadowed archway of the building. He moved with a kind of liquid silence that commanded attention more than any shout ever could. He was tall, dressed in a suit so black it seemed to drink the city lights, tailored with a precision that spoke of impossible wealth. His face was all sharp angles and stark beauty, a sculpture carved from unforgiving stone. But it was his eyes that held the night captive. They were dark, intense, and fixed solely on her. He stopped before her. The world seemed to fade into a muted, gray backdrop. The city noise, the chatter of the elite, the thrum of her own frantic pulse, it all vanished. There was only the unnerving stillness of his gaze. The man, Kang Jin-woo, felt the world tilt on its axis. He had seen her before, days ago, a lifetime ago. He'd been in a part of the city his father would have called a cesspool, closing a deal that left a sour taste in his mouth. He'd been sitting in his armored car, watching the rain wash the filth down the gutters, when he saw her through the window of a rundown diner. She was arguing with a belligerent customer, her chin jutted out, her eyes flashing with a fire that had nothing to do with wealth or power, and everything to do with a spirit that refused to be broken. She was magnificent. A vibrant, defiant flower growing through a crack in the concrete. He had spent the last 72 hours turning his organization upside down to find her. His second-in-command, Park Min-jun, had thought he'd lost his mind. And now, here she was, trying to get into his building, his world. Jin-woo turned his head slightly, his gaze never leaving Elena's face, and spoke to the terrified guard. His voice was quiet, a low murmur that carried more threat than a roar. "She is with me." He then looked back at Elena, a ghost of something unreadable in his eyes. He extended a hand, not to touch her, but as an offering, an invitation. "Please," he said, and the single word was both a command and a plea. He, Kang Jin-woo, the head of the Golden Dragon Syndicate, the man who never asked for anything, had just come down to open a door for a girl whose name wasn't on the list. And in that moment, he knew with a terrifying certainty that shook the foundations of his dark kingdom, that he would burn the whole world down to keep it open for her. The story, for them, had not started at the velvet rope. It had begun 3 days earlier in the rain. Jin-woo had been concluding a particularly distasteful piece of business. It involved a subsidiary company, a union boss who had gotten greedy, and a resolution that was swift, silent, and permanent. He sat in the back of his Maybach, the leather cool against his skin, watching the dreary afternoon unfold through the tinted, bulletproof glass. This part of the city was a constant reminder of the foundations upon which his family's empire was built: desperation, grit, and the kind of poverty that made people do things they would later regret. He hated it, not for the grime, but for the reflection of his own soul he saw in its cracked pavement and shuttered storefronts. He was a product of this same desperation, just wrapped in silk and steel. His life was a gilded cage, the bars forged by his father's ambition and welded shut by his own duty. His eyes, weary and cold, drifted to the diner across the street. The Morning Star. The sign was missing a letter, flickering weakly against the gray sky. It was the kind of place he had never set foot in, a relic of a simpler, harder world. And then he saw her. Elena Vance was behind the counter, her brow furrowed as she scribbled an order on a small notepad. Her hair was pulled back in a messy knot, and her apron was stained with coffee. She looked tired, but as a large, red-faced man started yelling, waving a half-eaten plate of food, something in her shifted. She didn't shrink. She didn't call for a manager. She stood taller. Jinwoo couldn't hear the words, but he could read the scene with perfect clarity. He was an expert in conflict, in the subtle shifts of power in a confrontation. The man was being unreasonable, abusive. Elena's hands were planted firmly on her hips, her expression a mixture of exhausted patience and simmering defiance. She pointed at the plate, then at the man's mouth, her meaning clear. "You ate most of it. You're paying for it." The man's face purpled. He slammed a fist on the counter. Jinwoo's own hand instinctively tightened into a fist in his lap. His driver, watching him in the rearview mirror, tensed. A flicker of Jinwoo's finger was all it would take. The man would have a very bad rest of his life. But then Elena did something that froze him. She laughed. It wasn't a sound of mirth. It was a sharp, incredulous bark of disbelief. She shook her head, picked up the man's plate, and dumped it into the trash with a decisive clang. Then she turned back, her eyes like chips of flint, and said something that made the man recoil as if slapped. He threw a few crumpled bills on the counter and stormed out, muttering under his breath. She watched him go, and for a moment the fiery mask dropped. Jinwoo saw the exhaustion flood back in, the slight slump of her shoulders, the deep sigh that fogged the glass. She was a warrior who had just won a battle, only to realize the war was endless. In that instant, the world stopped. The rain, the city, the darkness in his own soul, it all receded. There was only her, a woman with more strength in her weary posture than in all of his armed men combined. He felt a profound aching pull towards her, a feeling so foreign and powerful it terrified him. It was a hunger for something real in his life of carefully constructed artifice. "Minjun," he had spoken into his phone moments later, his voice rough. "Find out who she is." And so he had. Elena Vance, 24 years old, an aspiring painter who worked 2 jobs to afford a tiny apartment and a corner of a shared studio space, an orphan raised by a grandmother who had passed away 2 years prior. No family, save for a disapproving mother who had remarried and moved to another state. She was utterly alone, fiercely independent, and completely unimpressed by the world he inhabited. She was everything he was not. He had orchestrated the gala invitation through a labyrinth of shell corporations and business contacts, a complex military operation just to get her in the same room. He never imagined she would be stopped at the door. Seeing her there, small and defiant against the monolithic guard, had ignited a protective rage in him so potent it nearly blinded him. Now, standing before her under the opulent lights of his domain, he saw the same fire in her eyes he'd seen in the diner. But this time, it was directed at him. It was suspicion, wariness, and it was the most intoxicating thing he had ever encountered. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. The man, this Kang Jin-woo, as she would soon learn, led her through the throng of people. The crowd parted for him as if he were a king, their curious, speculative glances sliding off him and landing on her like insects. She felt exposed, a curiosity pinned to a board. Who was she? The whispers followed them, a silken, venomous tide. "I don't understand," she said, finally finding her voice as he led her to a secluded balcony overlooking the glittering cityscape. The air was cooler here, and for the first time since she'd arrived, she could breathe. "You were having trouble at the door," he stated simply, his back to her as he gazed out at the city. It was his city. She could feel it in the way he stood, a possessive stillness that claimed every light, every shadow as his own. "Trouble," she repeated, a note of sarcasm sharpening her tone. "Yes, that's one word for it. Being told I'm trash that needs to be taken out is another." She used her words as shields, the only defense she had against his overwhelming presence. He turned then, and his eyes held a flicker of something that looked like regret. "My apologies. The security is thorough. It will not happen again." "I'm sure it won't, since I'll be leaving in about 30 seconds. A smile touched his lips, a small, surprising thing that didn't quite reach his eyes, but transformed his severe face into something devastatingly handsome. It felt like a punch to the chest. "Please, stay. Have a drink with me." Why? The question screamed in her mind. Why me? She was nobody, a waitress in a borrowed dress. He could have any woman in that ballroom, women dripping with diamonds and old money. "Why?" she asked aloud, her bluntness a product of her own confusion. Jinwoo considered her question. He could not tell her the truth. "Because I saw you through a rainy window and felt the world shift. Because your defiance is the only honest thing I've seen in a decade." Instead, he chose a half-truth. "I appreciate honesty. I saw the way you handled that man at the door. You were not intimidated." "I'm intimidated now," she confessed, the admission slipping out before she could stop it. "This is a lot. You're a lot. Who are you?" "My name is Kang Jin-woo." He said it as if it should explain everything, and perhaps, in his world, it did. She searched his face, looking for a sign, a clue to the game he was playing, but his expression was shuttered, a mask of polite control. Yet, behind it, she sensed a profound loneliness, a stillness that wasn't peaceful but empty. It resonated with a hidden part of her own soul. Against her better judgment, against every survival instinct that had kept her afloat in the unforgiving city, she heard herself say, "Fine, one drink." That one drink turned into two, and then into an hour of conversation that was both stilted and shockingly intimate. He asked her about her painting, and she found herself describing her passion for capturing the city's hidden beauty, the moments of grace she found in the urban decay. He listened with an unnerving intensity, as if her words were the most important thing in the world. She, in turn, tried to learn about him, but his answers were vague, masterful deflections. He spoke of family business, global investments, and logistics. It was corporate jargon that meant nothing and everything. It was a wall, and she couldn't find a single crack in it. As he escorted her to a waiting car at the end of the night, a car that looked more like a moving fortress than a vehicle, he paused. "I would like to see you again, Elena Vance." He said her full name, and the sound of it on his lips was both a caress and a claim. "This is creepy, you know," she said, trying to regain her footing. "The whole powerful stranger plucking the damsel from obscurity thing. Is it legal?" His dry, self-deprecating humor surfaced again. "Probably not, but I find I don't care." He wanted to see her art, not at a gallery, but in her studio. The request was so unexpected, so far removed from the world of galas and black cars, that she agreed before she could think it through. "Tomorrow," he said, "tomorrow." The word hung in the air between them, filled with promise and a danger she couldn't yet name. For Jin-woo, the next day felt like an eternity. He sat through a board meeting with the legitimate front of his organization, his mind a million miles away. His father's portrait loomed over the mahogany table, its painted eyes a constant, judgmental presence. Chairman Kang had been a man of brutal simplicity. Power was everything. Emotion was a weakness to be excised. Jinwoo had spent his life adhering to that cold doctrine. Until now. Min Jun stood by his side, a silent, ever-present shadow. He'd known Jinwoo since they were boys, trained by the same harsh masters in the arts of combat and commerce, both legal and otherwise. "You are distracted," Min Jun observed in Korean as the meeting concluded, his voice low. "I am focused," Jinwoo lied. "Your focus is on a painter from the West District who makes less in a year than you just spent on lunch," Min Jun countered, his face impassive. "The elders are talking. They see this as a vulnerability." "Let them talk," Jinwoo snapped, his voice sharp as broken glass. "They are old men clinging to old ways. This is my organization now." But he knew Min Jun was right. His fascination with Elena was a risk. A massive, undefinable risk in a life built on calculated certainties. He didn't care. The thought of her, of the raw honesty in her eyes, was like a gulp of clean air after a lifetime of breathing smoke. Later that day, he stood outside her studio. It was in a converted warehouse, the air thick with the smell of turpentine and linseed oil. It was a world away from his sterile, silent penthouse. He felt like an intruder, a creature of the dark stepping into the light. Elena opened the door, and for a moment she just stared. He had shed the armor of his bespoke suit for a simple black cashmere sweater and dark trousers. He looked younger, more approachable, but the intensity in his gaze was unchanged. "You actually came," she said, a hint of awe in her voice. "I said I would." Her studio was a chaotic, beautiful mess. Canvases leaned against every wall, some vast and abstract, others small, intimate portraits of city life. He saw the diner. He saw the rain-slicked streets. He saw her world through her eyes, and it was breathtaking. He stopped in front of a large, unfinished canvas. It was a depiction of a single withered tree standing alone in a concrete courtyard, its branches reaching desperately for a sliver of sky visible between towering skyscrapers. It was a portrait of defiant loneliness. It was a portrait of him. "This one," he said, his voice thick with an emotion he couldn't name. "It feels familiar." Elena came to stand beside him. "It's about survival," she explained softly, "about holding on, even when you're surrounded by things that are trying to crush you." He looked from the painting to her, and the chasm between their worlds seemed to shrink. She saw it. She understood the cage, even if she didn't know its shape. In the weeks that followed, they built a fragile bridge across that chasm. He would appear at her diner late at night, sitting in a corner booth, just to watch her work. He sent her a collection of rare pigments from a master in Kyoto, an anonymous gift she immediately knew was from him. She, in turn, dragged him to a noisy, crowded street market, making him try food from a cart and laugh as he looked utterly lost and out of his element. She was chipping away at his armor piece by piece. He was becoming a dangerous addiction for her. The safety he offered was seductive. When her landlord tried to illegally evict her, the problem simply vanished overnight. When her student loan company sent a threatening letter, her balance was suddenly paid in full. "This has to stop," she confronted him one evening in his penthouse. A sprawling, minimalist space that felt more like a museum than a home. "The money, the fixing things. I can't live like this. I have to be able to stand on my own." "I am not trying to own you," Jinwoo said, his voice tight. He stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city lights a carpet of jewels at his feet. "I am trying to protect you." "Protect me from what? A late fee? A rude landlord?" she demanded, stepping closer. "Or from you? From whatever it is you really do, in buildings like this, with men who look at you with fear in their eyes?" The question hung in the air, a sword of Damocles. He had known this moment was coming. The confession. He had dreaded it, rehearsed it, and now it was here, and he was completely unprepared for the raw terror that gripped him. To tell her the truth was to risk losing her. But to lie would be to lose himself. He turned to face her. His expression was grim, the carefully constructed mask of the powerful businessman stripped away, leaving the face of the lonely kingpin beneath. "My family," he began, his voice low and steady despite the tremor in his soul, "does not deal in logistics, Elena. We deal in power. We own the ports. We control the flow of goods, both legal and otherwise. We enforce contracts that the law will not touch. We are the Golden Dragon Syndicate, and I am its head." He watched her face, searching for the revulsion, the fear. He saw both, but he also saw a flicker of pained understanding. She had suspected. She had known something dark lurked beneath the surface. "You're a gangster," she whispered, the words sounding absurd and childish in the vast, silent room. "I am," he confirmed, the admission costing him more than any deal he had ever made. He took a step closer, his hands remaining rigidly at his sides, fighting the overwhelming urge to reach for her, to hold her. "My father built this empire on violence and fear. I inherited it. It is a crown I never wanted, but it is mine to wear." Elena felt the floor drop out from under her. It was one thing to suspect, to imagine shadows and secrets. It was another to have the monster step into the light and name itself. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This was not a fairy tale. This was a nightmare. The man she was falling for, the man who looked at her paintings with such gentle understanding, was a part of a world of violence she couldn't even comprehend. Have you hurt people?" she asked, her voice trembling. His silence was her answer. It was a deep, damning void that confirmed her worst fears, the kindness he showed her, the gentleness. It was an island in an ocean of darkness. Just then, the penthouse elevator chimed, a soft, intrusive sound. The doors slid open, and an older man stepped out, flanked by two imposing guards. He was impeccably dressed, but his face was a mask of cold fury. He had Jinwoo's angular features, but they were hardened, cruel. It was Chairman Kang, or rather, his ghost, his uncle, Kang Min-ho, the man who had served as regent after his brother's death, and now acted as the resentful, watchful elder of the syndicate. "Jinwoo," Min-ho said, his voice like stones grinding together. His eyes flicked to Elena, dismissing her as one would an inconvenient piece of furniture. "We have business to discuss. Send the girl away." "She stays," Jinwoo said, his body instantly shifting into something harder, more dangerous. He moved to stand slightly in front of Elena, a human shield. The air crackled with tension. "This is your weakness," Min-ho sneered, gesturing at Elena with contempt. "A common girl who will bring ruin upon us. Our rivals, the White Tigers, they see this. They see you are distracted. They made a move on the docks tonight. Men were lost." The words hit Elena like shrapnel. Men were lost. This wasn't a movie. This was real. Blood had been spilled tonight while she was safe here, falling for a lie. "Get out, Uncle!" Jinwoo ordered, his voice dropping to a lethal whisper. Min-ho smiled, a chilling, predatory expression. He looked directly at Elena. "He cannot protect you forever. A pretty flower is easily crushed in the world of dragons." With a final, withering glare, the old man turned and left. The silence he left behind was heavier, more suffocating than the one before. Elena was shaking, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in her bones. The abstract danger had just been given a face and a name. White Tigers, the docks. Men were lost. "I have to go," she whispered, backing away from him. "Elena, please!" Jinwoo's voice was raw with desperation. He took a step towards her, his hand outstretched. "Let me explain. I can keep you safe." "Safe?" Her voice cracked, rising with hysteria. "There is no safe with you. Your world. It kills people. That man, your uncle, he looked at me like I was something to be scraped off his shoe before he had me killed. This isn't a life, Jinwoo. It's a war." "It is the only life I have ever known," he said, his own pain a stark, open wound on his face. "But it's not the only one I want," she cried, tears finally breaking free, tracing hot paths down her cheeks. "I can't. I can't be the reason men die. I can't look at my paintings and wonder if the money for the canvas came from someone's blood. I can't look at you and not see the darkness you live in." Every word was a knife in his heart. He knew she was right. He had brought the violence of his world to her doorstep. His love, the purest thing he had ever felt, was a poison that would destroy her. "I love you," he said, the words torn from the deepest part of him. It was the first time he had said them, the last time he might ever get to. The confession only made it worse. It made the choice more agonizing. Her heart screamed for him, for the lonely man she saw beneath the kingpin's crown, but her soul, her very sense of self, screamed for her to run. "Goodbye, Jinwoo," she sobbed. She turned and fled, not even waiting for the elevator. She ran for the stairs, her footsteps echoing in the terrifying, opulent silence of his gilded cage. Jinwoo did not follow. He stood frozen, listening to the sound of her fading footsteps, the sound of his world breaking apart. He had revealed his truth, and it had cost him everything. The king was alone on his throne once more. The days that followed Elena's departure were a uniform shade of gray. She went back to her life, but the colors had been leached out of it. The diner felt grimy, the customers more demanding, her tiny apartment more like a cell. She had run for her safety, for her principles, but it felt less like an escape and more like a self-imposed exile. Chloe found her a week later, sitting in her dark studio, staring at the unfinished painting of the lone tree. She hadn't touched a brush since that night. "You look terrible," Chloe said, her usual bright energy muted by concern. She placed a container of soup on a paint-splattered table. "Talk to me, Elle. What happened with Mr. Dark, handsome, and tragically wealthy?" Elena told her everything. The confession, the uncle, the mention of men dying. As she spoke, the horror of it all felt fresh, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Chloe listened, her expression growing more and more grim. "Oh, honey," she breathed when Elena was finished. "Mafia? Like actual, movie-style mafia? You did the right thing. You had to run." "I know," Elena whispered, her voice hoarse. "I know, but Chloe, I think I loved him." The admission hung in the dusty air, a painful, shimmering truth. She had seen a glimpse of the man he could be, the man trapped inside the monster, and she had fallen for that man. "You can't love someone like that," Chloe said gently, but without conviction. "It's not safe." "Love isn't supposed to be about safety," Elena replied, a tear sliding down her cheek and landing on the dusty floor. She tried to paint, she tried to work, but his ghost was everywhere. Every tall, well-dressed man she saw on the street made her heart leap into her throat. Every black car that drove by sent a jolt of fear through her. She was constantly looking over her shoulder, not because she thought he would harm her, but because she feared the world he inhabited would find her. His uncle's words echoed in her mind. "A pretty flower is easily crushed." Her mother called, her voice a familiar mix of concern and disapproval. "Chloe told me you were seeing someone important. What happened?" Elena gave her a heavily edited version, mentioning only that he came from a dangerous and powerful family, and she had ended it. "It's for the best," her mother said, a note of relief in her voice. "You belong here, Elena, in the real world, with normal people, that life of glamour and power. It's a fantasy, and it always ends badly for girls like us." "Girls like us." The phrase chafed. It was meant to be comforting, but it felt like a judgment, a reinforcement of the box the world had put her in. Jin Woo, for all his darkness, had never made her feel like a girl like us. He had made her feel like the only person in the world. The misery of separation was a physical weight, a constant ache in her chest that made it hard to breathe. She was safe, but she was incomplete. For Jinwoo, life without Elena was not life. It was a return to the cold, calculated existence he had always known, but the emptiness was now a gaping, raw wound. He threw himself into his work with a ferocity that terrified his subordinates and impressed the elders. He crushed the White Tiger's insurgency with brutal efficiency, a swift and merciless campaign that re-established the Golden Dragon's dominance. He became the king his father had always wanted him to be, ruthless, decisive, and utterly devoid of emotion. He sat in his penthouse, staring out at the city that was his kingdom, and felt nothing but ash. Her absence had hollowed him out. "You have secured your position," Minjun told him one night, pouring 2 glasses of scotch. "Your uncle has been silenced. The syndicate is stronger than ever." Jinwoo took the glass but didn't drink. "And what has it cost?" he asked, his voice flat. Minjun was silent for a long moment. He was more than a lieutenant. He was the closest thing Jinwoo had to a friend, a brother. "It cost you the only thing you ever truly wanted." Jinwoo's control finally snapped. He hurled the glass against the window. It shattered with a sharp crack, the expensive liquor running down the bulletproof pane like tears. "She was right," he snarled, pacing the room like a caged animal. "This world, this life, it's a disease. It poisons everything it touches. It poisoned her. It poisoned me." He had his men watch her, a secret, silent detail that kept its distance but ensured no harm ever came to her. He read their daily reports with a hunger that shamed him. Subject A worked her shift at the diner. Subject A purchased groceries. Subject A met with her friend. Subject A stood in her studio for 3 hours and did not paint. That last report broke him. He had not only brought danger into her life, he had stolen her art, the very essence of her soul. The light he had been so drawn to. He had extinguished it. That night, he made a decision, a choice that had been lurking in the back of his mind since the day he met her, a choice he had always believed was impossible. If he could not bring her into his world, he would burn his world down and build a new one she could live in. It was a declaration of war against his own legacy. The process was a bloody, protracted battle fought not on the streets, but in boardrooms, back alleys, and the deepest vaults of his family's empire. The grand gesture of change was not a single dramatic act, but a slow, arduous dismantling of a criminal dynasty. Jinwoo started by severing ties with the most illicit parts of the business, the trafficking, the extortion, the violence for hire. He sold off assets, closed down operations, and paid exorbitant sums to make problems and people disappear. Each move created a vacuum, and his rivals rushed to fill it, leading to violent skirmishes at the fringes of his territory. He weathered them, absorbing the losses, his eyes fixed on the ultimate prize, legitimacy. The elders, led by his uncle Minho, were apoplectic. They saw him as a traitor, a weakling throwing away a century of power for a woman. "You are destroying your father's legacy," Minho screamed at him during a tense family meeting, his face contorted with rage. "My father's legacy is built on bones," Jinwoo replied, his voice chillingly calm. "I intend to build mine on something more solid." The confrontation was inevitable. Minho, believing Jinwoo had been weakened by his new morality, made his move. He attempted a coup, leveraging the loyalty of the old guard. It was a foolish, desperate gamble. Minho had underestimated the depth of Jinwoo's resolve and the loyalty of men like Minjun, who saw that Jinwoo was fighting not out of weakness, but out of a strength his uncle could never comprehend. The fight was not clean. It happened one night in the parking garage beneath Jinwoo's headquarters, an ambush. Jinwoo, with Minjun by his side, fought with the deadly skill they had been taught as boys. It ended with Jinwoo standing over his uncle, a deep gash on his arm bleeding through his shirt, a thin, permanent scar now etched above his eye from a glancing blow. "This ends now," Jinwoo said, his voice ragged. "He did not kill his uncle. Instead, he exiled him, stripping him of all power and wealth, a fate worse than death for a man like Minho. It took a full year, a year of fighting, restructuring, and bleeding money. By the end, the Golden Dragon Syndicate was a shadow of its former self, reborn as the Golden Dragon Global, a legitimate, if still intimidating, shipping and logistics corporation. He had sacrificed half his fortune and nearly his life. He was no longer a kingpin. He was just a CEO, a man with a scarred face and a past that would forever haunt him. He was finally a man he thought Elena could stand to look at. A year had passed for Elena, a year of muted colors and quiet survival. She had eventually started painting again, channeling her heartbreak and fear onto the canvas. Her work became darker, more complex, imbued with a raw emotion it had previously lacked. Chloe, ever her champion, had helped her get a showing at a small, independent gallery. To her shock, she sold 2 pieces on the opening night. With the money, she quit the diner. She poured all her energy into her art, and slowly, piece by piece, she began to build a new life for herself. It was a quiet life, a safe life. And most nights, she hated it. She dreamed of him, of his intense gaze and the surprising gentleness in his hands. She would wake with a profound sense of loss, the phantom feeling of his presence, a fresh ache in her soul. One rainy afternoon, reminiscent of the day he had first seen her, she was in her studio, cleaning brushes. The bell above the door chimed. She didn't look up, assuming it was Chloe. "We're closed," she said, her voice distant. "Elena." The voice. It shot through her, a jolt of electricity that made her drop the brush she was holding. It spattered red paint across the floor like a pool of blood. She turned slowly, her heart hammering against her ribs. It was him. Kang Jin-woo stood in the doorway, rain clinging to his dark coat. He looked different, thinner, tired. There was a faint silver scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a mark that hadn't been there before. The oppressive, dangerous aura that had once surrounded him was gone, replaced by a deep, weary stillness. He looked human. He didn't move from the doorway, as if he knew crossing the threshold was a privilege he hadn't yet earned. "What are you doing here?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "I came to see your art," he said, his eyes scanning the new pieces on the walls. They were filled with shadows and fractured light, portraits of pain and longing. His gaze lingered on one in particular, a man's silhouette standing before a vast window, the city lights reflected in the glass like a cage of stars. "It's not for sale," she said reflexively. "I'm not here to buy anything," he replied, finally taking a hesitant step into the room. "I'm here to tell you that you were right about my world, about me. It was a poison, so I destroyed it." Elena stared at him, uncomprehending. "What are you talking about?" He told her everything. The year-long war to go legitimate, the fight with his uncle, the dismantling of his father's empire. He spoke without pride or drama, stating the facts as if delivering a financial report. He explained that he hadn't done it for her, not exactly. He had done it because of her. She had held up a mirror and he had been horrified by the monster looking back. He had to become a man he could live with before he could ever dare to see her again. "The Golden Dragon Syndicate is gone," he finished, his voice raw. "It's just a company now. A boring, legal shipping company. I'm no longer a king, Elena. I'm just a man who loves you more than his own life." Tears streamed down her face, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of disbelief, of hope, of a love she had tried so desperately to kill, but that had refused to die. He had not asked her to accept his darkness. He had stepped into the light. He had laid down his crown, not for her, but for the hope of her. She crossed the studio in 3 short steps. She reached up and gently touched the scar on his eyebrow. He flinched at her touch, as if unused to kindness. His eyes, those dark, intense eyes, were filled with a vulnerability she had never seen before. It was the look of a man who had laid his entire soul at her feet, terrified she would crush it. She didn't say a word. She couldn't. Instead, she rose on her toes and pressed her lips to his. The reunion kiss was not gentle. It was a desperate, hungry collision, a year of unspoken longing and unbearable pain poured into a single, frantic moment. It was the taste of rain and tears and redemption. His arms came around her, pulling her tight against him as if he could absorb her into himself, as if he was afraid she might vanish if he let go. It was a kiss that sealed the past and promised a future, a fierce, passionate claiming that said, "You are mine, and I am yours, and the war is finally over." In that kiss, the two halves of their sundered world finally became whole. 3 years later, the rain fell on the city just as it had on the day they first saw each other. But now, they watched it from behind the windows of a home, not a fortress. The sprawling penthouse had been sold, replaced by a warm, light-filled house with a large, airy studio for Elena. Her art was now celebrated, her name known in circles that had once been impossibly distant. She had found her voice, her power, not through him, but beside him. Jin Woo ran his company with the same decisive intelligence he had run his syndicate, but his goals were different now. He built schools and funded community projects in the same blighted neighborhoods his family had once exploited. He was still a formidable, powerful man, but the fear he inspired had been replaced by respect. The scar above his eye was a permanent reminder of the price he had paid for his redemption, a price he would pay again without hesitation. He came into her studio, finding her standing before a new canvas, a bright, hopeful landscape. He wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on her shoulder, his presence a comforting, solid warmth. "What are you thinking about?" he asked softly, his voice a low rumble against her ear. "I was thinking about the guard at the gala," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "And the girl whose name wasn't on the list." He turned her in his arms, his dark eyes soft with a love that still, after all this time, took her breath away. "That girl's name," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is on the list for everything. It is the only name on my list." He kissed her then, a slow, gentle kiss filled with the quiet certainty of a love that had been tested by darkness and had emerged, scarred but unbreakable, into the light. They had found their peace, not by ignoring the past, but by building a future strong enough to hold its weight. The resilient heart and the redeemed kingpin, two survivors who had found in each other not a fairy tale, but something far more real and precious, a hard-won, unconditional love. This story is about the transformative power of love and the idea that no one is beyond redemption. It teaches us that true strength isn't about power or control over others, but about the courage to confront the darkness within ourselves and make fundamental changes for the better. It highlights that love should not require someone to accept a life of danger or compromised morals, but instead can inspire a person to become worthy of that love by changing their world. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you were moved by the story of Elena and Jinwoo, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up, subscribing to our channel for more dramatic romances, and sharing it with someone who loves a story about love conquering all. Now for our question of the day. When Jinwoo confessed his identity as a mafia boss, Elena chose to leave. Do you think she made the right decision at that moment, or should she have stayed and tried to change him from the beginning? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And finally, we want to know what you'd like to see next. Vote in our poll. A. A story about Park Min-joon, Jinwoo's loyal second-in-command, finding an unexpected love of his own. B. A prequel story about Jinwoo's father, Chairman Kang, and how he built the Golden Dragon Syndicate. C. A story about Chloe, Elena's best friend, and her own whirlwind romance.